How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about the Steam Deck. These videos, the news updates, are basically like a podcast you can watch or listen to that'll fill you in on everything you need to know about the Steam Deck. So if that sounds good to you, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed and set your notifications to all. Thank you so much for all the subscriptions, views, and everything else lately. I really appreciate it. And if you want to be extra cool, you can follow my Twitter at deck_ready. I talk about Steam Deck stuff there, so it's worth a follow. In today's video, I have 3 topics for you guys. Starting out with, we have a much needed Steam Deck update that's bringing a lot of bug fixes, thank God. After that, I dug into all the reports surrounding Expedition 33 being the one Unreal Engine 5 game that runs on Steam Deck, and my results were mixed but positive mixed. And finally, are us Steam Deck users seriously underestimating the Switch 2? I put that in quotes for a reason. That's what's being said about us, so I wanted to talk about it. But yeah, let's jump into the first news story here, which is a much needed Steam Deck update that fixes a ton of bugs with SteamOS. The reason I say it's sorely needed is because while they're working on getting SteamOS out on other devices, there have been a lot of bugs introduced that kind of just degrade the overall experience on the Steam Deck, and those little bugs, they add up. I talked about in the last video how I ran into an issue that other people were reporting where I had to completely re-image SteamOS on a brand new refurbished Steam Deck. So that's not what I want to deal with at the end of the day when I only got a couple of hours of gaming time. So I'm glad Valve turned around and updated a ton of bugs. The first thing they added is a requested feature. So people were asking for the UI slider to always be active, not just when a game is running. So they added that feature in, which is much appreciated. Another bug they fixed is that startup movies actually play at the right size. Apparently they were being downscaled for a lot of people, which honestly sounds kind of funny. And that's just in time for the new Last of Us 2 one they released, which is pretty cool. It doesn't really look like The Last of Us. It makes gun noises and the siren from the end of the first Last of Us game. And it looks really cool. It's kind of like zombie themed generally, less than the Last of Us theme, so I'll take it. And they fixed another issue that I've been running into where games will launch before they download the Steam Cloud save. This is really only for people who play on multiple devices like I do. I have the Steam Deck and a main gaming PC, and I was like, where is the save from an hour ago? And I realized it was because it didn't download the actual save before the game opened, so that's an important fix. And finally, this doesn't matter because it has to do with verification, but I'll tell you anyway. They made it so all of the correct verification status will show up. Apparently it wasn't happening for a lot of games, so they fixed that issue on the back end. This is always great to see. I'm glad Valve is taking some time to fix existing bugs, because when they release SteamOS on other platforms, that you want it to be as good as possible, right? Like, you're presenting it for the first time to a lot of these people, especially if they've been using Bazzite. They're already looking at SteamOS as kind of inferior to Bazzite in the first place. So if they do go through the trouble to install it on their device, you want it to put its best foot forward. So I'm always glad to see bug fixes. Let's move on to the second news story though, which is about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This is a game that I was like praying would work well on the Steam Deck, just because it's a turn-based JRPG that's made by Western devs. And I don't know why, I've always really liked to play turn-based JRPG style games on handhelds. I just love it. I played the games like Fire Emblem Awakening on the 3DS. I played Persona 4 Golden on my PlayStation Vita. All those games are easy to run now on the Steam Deck, which is great. But when you look at a game like this, it's like, man, that would be so good on a handheld, because when you're grinding in JRPGs and battles, it's just nice to be able to do that when you're watching TV or doing something else, or if you're just sitting in your backyard. So I was really excited when I saw a video go up on DeckWizard that said it's a must play on the Steam Deck. He even put the Metacritic badge in the thumbnail, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then I watched the video, and at medium-ish settings with FSR set to balanced, I'm pretty sure, it looked like it was holding a pretty rock solid 30 FPS. But then I went over to the Steam Deck subreddit and I saw one of the most upvoted threads was basically saying this game's a mess on the Steam Deck. So I was like, who's right? My next move, of course, was to go to Steam Deck Gaming. That's one of my favorite channels for seeing if a game runs. And thankfully he had some tweaks that do actually make it more than playable on the Steam Deck. So the first weird issue this game has is that the brightness is cranked to the moon when you boot it up for the first time. And I've noticed that even the DeckWizard and other people who are recording their Steam Deck screen are not adjusting the brightness at all. So the game looks completely blown the out when you're playing it on the Steam Deck. That's obviously a very simple fix. You just reduce the gamma of the game. For some reason, it just doesn't bother some people. So if it's not bothering you, don't worry about it. But that's one major issue figured out because people were saying it looked washed out. Turns out it was because the brightness is cranked too high. The only other major issue I saw is like very similar to Metaphor ReFantazio, which is like when you're in a town with a lot of people, you're going to see some like sub 30 FPS frame times going on. Like I saw it drop to like 27 for a couple of seconds or so, but it really seemed like that was only affecting the game in the intro before the expedition actually starts. I haven't played the game and I don't want to be spoiled, so I haven't looked if there's big cities later on, but every piece of footage I've seen is like a big, vast, open area world. Like you're in the nature zone of this world and not in a city. So I feel like even if there are big cities later in the game, it's a similar situation to Baldur's Gate 3 where people just kind of brute force their way through the lower frame rates and the populated towns. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. The other weird thing I think is worth mentioning is that it says it's unsupported, but it's totally playable, as I just said. But the developers, I think, listed it as unsupported because they plan on doing a Steam Deck optimization patch after launch. And a lot of developers, I don't know why, if they're working on support after launch, they just automatically shoot for unsupported. I think they should just go for playable because it is playable right out of the box. And as I said in my video where I talked about how I would fix verification, a lot of people, when they see unsupported, they read it literally. They say, oh, the game just doesn't work on Steam Deck. And as we know, for the vast majority of unsupported games, that's just not the case. So I would urge the developers to just email Valve and get it marked as playable because it is playable and that'll probably get you some sales of the game. I do have some minor gripes with how everything looks when you're using FSR. Like it definitely looks a little blurry. It's hard to tell without actually playing it because, you know, I'm watching an 800p video blown up to my 1440p monitor. I'm sure if I shrunk it down, it'd give me a better image, but Steam Deck Gaming said that he's absolutely hooked on the game and that when it's in action, it doesn't really look or run all that bad. I did see a major frame drop when the loading screen started before you go into a random battle, but like that doesn't really bother me. There's so much going on screen that it doesn't look like the game is chugging. It just looks like it's dropping frames and you have to really pixel peep to actually see it. So yeah, this game kind of does deserve the crown for the best running on Steam Deck Unreal Engine 5 game. Now, you know, the bar is on the floor. That's like being the last person to black out at a bar. You still blacked out because you're getting Unreal Engine problems and it's ridiculously hard to run, but it's nice to see that there are games that exist that can come out optimized with Unreal Engine 5, and it's both on the developers and Epic to fix this. So more games are going to continue to use it. Hopefully as time goes on, we start to see more and more games that use it come out that actually work right at launch on the Steam Deck, because this is promising and good. This game's also not full price. It's on a launch sale right now for $44, and apparently you can get like 30 or 40 hours out of it. It just seems really cool. I feel bad for them because Xbox released the Oblivion remaster the same week as this big Game Pass game that was coming out that's also an RPG. I don't know what the problem is there. And it also is plagued by the same problem that every game that signs to Game Pass has, where once you do that, for some reason, you just like forfeit all right to have your game marketed. So as my friend Jake Baldino always says, people are always begging for new original games that do cool, new, interesting things. Then they come out and no one plays them. So if you're waffling between Oblivion for the 500th time or a brand new cool JRPG from a studio made up of 30 people, I'll let you guess which one I would go with. I thought it was worth talking about because it does run well on the Steam Deck. I'm going out of town for my wife's birthday to Chicago this weekend. So yeah, we're going to visit her mom. I like sitting on her porch playing the Steam Deck. I think I'm going to grab this game for while I'm doing that. And finally, that brings me to the third news story here, which is our Steam Deck players, aka us, quote unquote, seriously underestimating the Switch 2. I saw this article go up on Nintendo Life and I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through some things that I think were pushed a little far just because, you know, I'm the Steam Deck's version of Nintendo Life, right? The channel's called Deck Ready. I'm a huge Steam Deck fan. This person on Nintendo Life who wrote the article clearly is a massive Nintendo Switch 2 fan, and I think they stretched things quite a bit. So the first thing they took issue with was comparing the prices. The Steam Deck starts at $399 for a brand new model. I think it's 256 gigabytes in there. Same amount of storage as the Switch 2, which starts at $450. The reason they didn't like that tweet is because the Switch 2 is $450, right? But it has a dock in the box and you have to pay for a dock for the Steam Deck. Of course, they go right for the official dock, but if they paid attention to the Steam Deck space, they'd know that that's probably the last dock anyone would use for the Steam Deck. And that's because any USB-C hub would work. So you could buy like a $10 or $15 one that has an HDMI port and an Ethernet port, and you'd be good to go as long as it has a power input USB-C port. I mean, those things are super cheap and you probably already have one in your house. There's also like a billion different docks from companies like JSOX that range from around $25 to $35. So like either way, unless you go for the most expensive dock, which arguably has the worst functionality of any dock on the market, you're going to pay less for the Steam Deck at the end of the day. And realistically, the Steam Deck should be cheaper because it's 3-year-old hardware. Like if they were charging $450, $500 for it, I don't think it would sell as well as it did. So yeah, I think I'd go back to the drawing board on the pricing argument, but at the end of the day, again, it doesn't really matter. They also point out that when the Steam Deck is docked, it doesn't get any extra performance, and that the fan in the dock on the Switch 2 allegedly doubles its performance when it's in TV mode. I'll have to wait and see on that. That sounds a little far-fetched to me if I'm being real. Like they compared it to the Xbox Series S, and I definitely don't see that being the case, especially when you look at games like Cyberpunk 2077 and how they run on the Series S and how they run on the Switch 2. I think you're overestimating the ability of the Switch 2 despite how powerful it is. They also go to the classic argument of, oh, the Steam Deck has 1.6 teraflops and the Switch 2 is like 3.9 million. I don't give a shit about teraflops. I don't know what they mean. We have this argument every time the new consoles come out. Everyone's talking about teraflops and how much graphical horsepower these consoles have. And then suddenly the games come out and they run identically on the Series X and the PS5 because teraflops don't matter. No, you don't know what teraflops do. Stop invoking their name. Also, in my experience, the Steam Deck works just fine docked. You get a full PC interface. Like you can use it like a desktop, watch YouTube. I make my Trello cards for these videos where I collect all the news on my Steam Deck's desktop interface. And you can emulate every Nintendo game under the sun. Like if you really want to put these things head to head, if I want to play any game from Nintendo up to the Wii U, I can do that extremely easily while docked at a good resolution. And I can even play it like the Wii U, where the gamepad screen is on my Steam Deck and the TV screen is on my monitor. I can play the PS2, I can play the PS1, I can play the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, the 3DS. Like even if you say they get games on the retro library for the Switch, you have to subscribe to Nintendo Switch Online to get them. And the library is good, but it's not as complete as what you can play on the Steam Deck. At the end of the day, I think the only reason a lot of people end up docking their Switch is because it's the least comfortable handheld console ever released. It's flat, it's square, it's sharp, whereas the Steam Deck is bigger and bulkier and has the feel of holding a controller, which makes it comfortable to play in handheld. Like, I don't think anyone docks the Steam Deck because it's such a good handheld, whereas the Switch is docked because it works better in docked mode. I mean, that's like arguable for sure, but I like playing the Switch more docked because it hurts my hands when I'm holding it above my head in bed. And you know, if you buy new Joy-Cons that have grips, you buy a Satisfy grip or whatever, that increases the MSRP, which is why that's always a dumb argument to make. Then of course the screen has to come into play. They say because it's 120 hertz versus 90 that you're going to get better frame rates out of the Switch 2. That 120 hertz screen, I will say it until I go blue in the face. It is not to play 120 hertz games. It is to play games at 40 FPS like Cyberpunk 2077. And you're right, the Steam Deck does have a 90 hertz screen instead of a 120 hertz screen, but it can change its refresh rate to be better at 40 FPS just like the Switch 2. And since we know that there are not going to be really any Switch games that can run at 120 FPS. It's a non-argument. Also, they point out that 1080p is a better resolution than 800p. My argument there is you're only going to get 1080p out of select games. It's going to use DLSS to upscale probably from 720p. So I'd argue that it's better to be able to run games natively at 800p than upscale them from 800p to 1080p because that never looks as good. And also, it's just weird to say we're underestimating the Switch 2 because every time I talk about it, people are in the comments saying they're going to buy a Switch 2. As is always said, these are for different audiences. If you want to play Switch 2 games, you're going to buy a Switch 2. If you want to play a lot of PC games, you're going to buy a Steam Deck. And guess what? I stayed up till midnight last night and I pre-ordered a Switch 2. It's just video games. It's not that serious, guys. Like, the Steam Deck is not encroaching on the Switch 2's land. The Switch 2 is going to sell just fine. We only have 4 million Steam Decks out there. It is nice to see people constantly bringing it up though in tweets because for some some reason, it makes people mad. It also makes Switch 2 people mad when you don't compare it to a Series S and compare it to a PS4, when in reality, it's much more comparable to a PS4 than an Xbox Series S. Nintendo fans just gotta calm down, man. We can all exist in the same space. The handhelds are king of the world these days, and I'm here for it. I can never have enough handhelds. I've got a Legion Go, I've got an ROG Ally, I've got a Steam Deck. I'm gonna have a Switch 2, and I'm hyped for Donkey Kong Bonanza, man. Like, I am so excited for that game. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching till the end of the video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.